criminal crisis in Laikipia is heartbreaking and frustrating. Year in, year out, the loss of lives, livestock, livelihoods and homes. Yet, it's the same script, same cast. We see a flare-up of violence, and then we see government swooping in, crackdowns, arrests of political leaders. In many cases, it's been the same leaders arrested each time with no information as to what happens to those cases. This response is clearly not working. Yet we keep doing the same thing, hoping to get a different result. Could it be perhaps because we have not identified all the issues at the heart of these perennial conflicts? Could it be the framing of the issues and the subsequent responses? What we've seen so far is a routing out of criminals. Those who may want to take over titles using the gun as stated by the regional commissioner. We've seen a response by the anti-stock theft unit and the arrests of alleged financiers of the violence. That is well and good, because we cannot allow criminals to endanger the lives and livelihoods of law-abiding citizens. But what is also true, but is less discussed, is the perennial question of land and access to that land. What we know is that the northern rangelands have been degraded by drought and deforestation, pushing pastoralist communities down south in search of pasture for their livestock. And it is here that they find the large tracts of land owned by ranchers and conservationists, land to which they have limited access. What we also see here is the constant battle between the concept of conservation and whether that is done at the exclusion of locals and their way of life and their needs. There are certainly criminal elements that are fueling the flames, but this is far from typical armed robbery or arson. There is no doubt a deeper question, one revolving around resources that have become increasingly scarce owing to climate change and reduced access to land. And that is why taking a holistic look at the issue may be the first step in finding a lasting solution to this never-ending cycle of death and destruction. How we frame the issues matters and determines the response. Up until now, the dominant narrative is that of senseless bandits raining terror on innocent residents. And of course, many innocent people have lost their lives in the hands of these criminals. But this is only a small part of the story. It only calls for one response: crackdown and arrests, and that has only taken us so far. So what if we looked at other solutions, such as equal investments, not just in conservation, but in pastoralism too? What if we put efforts, financial efforts, in restoration of lost rangelands in northern Kenya that is putting pressure on the pastoralists? Look at the millions of dollars that's been put into conservation, into cushioning them from the effects of the pandemic due to lower numbers. How much of that has gone into pastoralist communities? Yes, conservation is important, and yes, it does bring millions of dollars from tourism. But no sustainable conservation can happen in isolation of or at the expense of human beings. And no impression should ever be created that we care more about wildlife than we do humans, because that only leads to resentment. So what if we looked at issues like negotiated settlements that focus on giving access while still protecting the environment, helping the pastoralists transfer some of their stock wealth from cattle during good times? What if we did all of this in addition to the crackdowns against criminal elements who take advantage of all of these underlying issues for their own selfish gains? My take is this: let the crackdowns by all means continue. Let the arrest be made of anyone who has anything to do with the current flare-up. But for heaven's sake, let's not make this just about bandits. This is a complex problem that cannot have an easy answer. That for as long as we are merely treating the symptoms and not the underlying sickness, so long will the cycles of violence keep coming and going, with the attendant death and destruction at every turn.